Sometimes the cruelest punishment in life is not losing the person you loved. It's seeing the life you could have had, living perfectly without you. The mall was loud with the chaos of Black Friday. Shopping bags brushed against polished tile floors. Christmas music drifted down from glittering speakers hidden among giant wreaths and silver decorations hanging 3 stories high above the crowd. Children laughed beside the glowing windows of toy stores while exhausted parents carried armfuls of boxes beneath warm golden lights that reflected against marble columns like a postcard version of happiness. Ethan Callaway barely noticed any of it. The billionaire CEO moved through the crowded luxury wing, surrounded by silence that money always seemed to create around powerful men. People recognized him instantly. Some whispered. Some stared. Others quickly looked away. At 42, Ethan had become the kind of man magazines called untouchable. The kind of man photographed beside private jets and skyscrapers with headlines about billion-dollar acquisitions and impossible success stories. His charcoal wool coat probably cost more than most families spend on rent in a month, yet somehow it did nothing to warm him against the cold ache sitting permanently inside his chest. "Mr. Callaway, the car will be waiting downstairs," his assistant said quietly beside him, struggling to keep pace through the crowd. Ethan gave a distracted nod while adjusting the cuff of his watch. The polished black face reflected flashes of Christmas lights as shoppers hurried past carrying oversized bags from designer stores. Then suddenly, somewhere behind him, he heard a child scream. Not fear. Surprise. Ethan turned instinctively just as a little boy slipped near the crowded escalator entrance. Time slowed. Shopping bags scattered across the floor. A woman gasped. The child's small body tilted dangerously toward the hard marble tile before Ethan stepped forward without thinking and caught him firmly by the arm. The boy looked up immediately, and Ethan froze. Pale blue-gray eyes stared back at him. Eyes identical to his own. The same sharp shape. The same silver flecks near the center. Even. The boy's dark blonde hair curled slightly near one eyebrow exactly the way Ethan's had when he was young. For one impossible second, it felt like staring into a forgotten photograph of himself. "Noah," a little girl's voice shouted nearby. Ethan looked up again. Another child pushed through the crowd toward them. A little girl around the same age, wearing a cream-colored winter coat and knitted gloves. She stopped beside the boy, breathing hard. And Ethan's stomach tightened violently. She had the same eyes too. "Are you okay?" Ethan asked softly, his voice strangely unsteady. The boy nodded. "Thanks, sir," he said politely. His voice carried warmth. Innocence. Trust. Ethan couldn't breathe properly. Around them, the mall continued moving in waves of noise and music and light, but suddenly all of it sounded distant. Muffled, like the world had slipped underwater. Then he heard the voice. "Noah. Lily." Ethan knew that voice before he even turned around. Soft. Calm. Familiar enough to split open 10 years of carefully buried memories in a single heartbeat. Claire Bennett stood 20 feet away beside the entrance of a small bookstore, holding 2 paper coffee cups in trembling hands. Her eyes met his across the crowded mall, and the color drained slowly from her face. Neither of them moved. Between them, Christmas lights shimmered against polished floors while strangers brushed past without realizing an entire lifetime had just collided in the middle of the mall. The sound of the mall slowly returned in fragments. Distant laughter, rolling shopping carts, the soft hum of Christmas music floating down from hidden ceiling speakers. But for Ethan Callaway, none of it felt real anymore. Claire stood frozen beneath the warm lights of the bookstore entrance, her fingers tightening around the cardboard coffee tray as if it were the only thing holding her upright. 10 years disappeared from Ethan's mind all at once. Suddenly, he was 29 again, standing beside her in a tiny apartment kitchen that smelled like cinnamon candles and burnt coffee, listening to rain strike against old windows while she laughed at one of his terrible jokes. Back then, before the skyscrapers and magazine covers and billion-dollar deals, Claire Bennett had been the only thing in his life that ever felt honest. Noah looked between them with quiet confusion. "Mom," he asked softly. Claire blinked quickly, pulling herself back into the present. "We should go," she said almost immediately, her voice calm but fragile around the edges. Ethan noticed the same thing she used to do whenever she was nervous. Her left thumb rubbed lightly against the side of the coffee cup without her realizing it. Some habits never disappeared. Lily stepped closer to Claire and grabbed her hand while studying Ethan carefully with curious blue-gray eyes. Ethan's chest tightened again. It was not only the eyes. It was the way the little girl tilted her head while thinking. The exact expression his mother used to tease him about when he was a child. Claire, Ethan finally said. Her name felt unfamiliar and painfully intimate at the same time. Claire looked at him fully now. She had changed in ways that hurt him unexpectedly. There were faint shadows beneath her eyes that had not existed 10 years ago. A softness around her smile that looked earned through exhaustion rather than happiness. She wore a simple beige coat that looked warm but worn at the sleeves, and a silver necklace rested against her sweater exactly where it always had. Not expensive, not glamorous, just Claire. Steady, quiet, real. Ethan suddenly became aware of how cold and artificial his own life had become. His assistant stepped closer cautiously. Mr. Calloway, the board members are already waiting downtown for the dinner meeting. Ethan ignored him completely. He could not stop staring at the children. Noah shifted awkwardly under the attention. Mom, who is he? He asked. Claire hesitated for half a second too long. Ethan noticed. An old friend, she answered gently. Friend. The word landed harder than anger would have. Ethan swallowed slowly, trying to steady the strange pressure building in his throat. He had spoken in front of senators and investors worth billions without ever losing control of his voice. Yet standing here in the middle of a crowded shopping mall beside a bookstore scented with coffee and paper, he suddenly felt 19 years old and terrified. You look good, he said quietly. Claire almost smiled at the absurdity of it. You always were a terrible liar, Ethan. Her voice was not cruel. That somehow made it worse. A silence settled between them. Not empty. Heavy. The kind built from years of words never spoken. Nearby, snowflake decorations turned slowly beneath warm ceiling lights, while shoppers passed carrying luxury bags and laughing children. The entire mall glowed with holiday warmth. But Ethan felt something cold opening deep inside him. Because for the first time in 10 years, he realized success had given him everything except the one thing standing right in front of him. Claire adjusted the scarf around Lily's neck gently before looking back at Ethan one last time. Take care of yourself, she said softly. Then she turned and walked away with the twins disappearing slowly into the sea of Christmas lights and moving crowds, leaving Ethan standing completely still beneath the glittering ceiling while a feeling he had buried years ago finally came back to life. That night, the city glittered beneath Ethan Calloway's penthouse windows like a kingdom made of cold diamonds. Endless streams of headlights moved through Manhattan far below, while helicopters blinked red across the winter sky. From the outside, his life looked untouchable. Perfect. The kind of success people wrote books about. Inside the penthouse, silence waited for him like it always did. Ethan loosened his tie slowly as he stepped through the massive glass doors overlooking Central Park. The marble floors reflected soft amber lighting from modern chandeliers suspended above the dining room. But the space felt less like a home and more like a luxury hotel nobody actually lived in. Everything was spotless, perfectly arranged, lifeless. His assistant followed him inside holding a tablet filled with tomorrow's schedule. The Tokyo investors moved the conference call to 8:30 Eastern Time, she explained carefully. And Vanessa confirmed the engagement party guest list. Ethan stopped walking. Engagement party. The words suddenly sounded strange in his head. Empty. Vanessa Whitmore was beautiful in the polished way magazine covers loved. Daughter of a billionaire hotel magnate. Educated. Elegant. Strategic. Their relationship made sense to shareholders and financial reporters. She understood how to smile for cameras, how to stand beside him at charity galas, how to speak about market expansion over champagne, while photographers captured the perfect image of power and wealth. But Ethan could not remember the last real conversation they had. He dismissed his assistant quietly and walked toward the enormous windows overlooking the city. His reflection stared back at him in the dark glass. Expensive suit, silver watch, tired eyes. Then suddenly, against his will, another face appeared in his memory. Noah. The boy's pale blue-gray eyes had followed him all evening like a ghost. Ethan poured himself a glass of bourbon but stopped before drinking it. His hand was trembling slightly. That never happened. Not during billion-dollar negotiations. Not during economic crashes. Not even during the hostile takeover that made him one of the youngest CEOs on Wall Street. Yet one little boy saying, "Thanks, sir," had unsettled him more than any boardroom battle ever could. He sat slowly on the leather couch while the city lights flickered across the glass walls around him. Somewhere in the distance, a siren echoed faintly through the streets below. Ethan closed his eyes. 10 years ago, Claire used to laugh at places like this. "Nobody needs ceilings this high," she once told him while standing barefoot inside a luxury condo he almost bought before his company exploded into a billion-dollar empire. "It feels like rich people are trying to impress God." He remembered laughing so hard, he nearly spilled coffee all over her sweater. Back then, life had still felt warm, human. Before investors began controlling every hour of his day. Before his mother quietly convinced him that love was weakness and family complicated ambition. Before he chose success over the woman who sat beside him through years of struggle and uncertainty. Ethan stood suddenly and walked toward the far hallway where framed magazine covers lined the walls. Forbes, Fortune, Business Weekly. Every headline praised him as a visionary, a genius, a titan of industry. Yet tonight, all he could see were two children standing beside a tired woman in a bookstore. Ethan stared at one photograph, showing himself shaking hands beside a United States senator after closing a $12 billion infrastructure deal. He looked confident, powerful, untouchable. But for the first time, the image made him feel sick. Because somewhere across the city, Claire Bennett was probably helping two children finish homework at a small kitchen table while he stood alone inside a penthouse big enough to echo. And deep down, Ethan realized something terrifying. He could not stop thinking about them. The next morning, snow drifted softly across Manhattan like scattered ash beneath a pale winter sky. Ethan sat at the head of a 40-foot conference table surrounded by executives in tailored suits discussing a merger worth nearly $6 billion. But he had not heard a single word in the last 10 minutes. Numbers flashed across enormous presentation screens while polished voices debated market shares and overseas expansion, yet all Ethan could see was a little girl in a cream-colored coat holding her mother's hand beneath Christmas lights. "Mr. Calloway," one executive asked carefully. Ethan blinked once and realized the entire room had gone silent waiting for his response. He adjusted his silver cufflink slowly, masking the distraction that almost never happened in public. "Move forward with the acquisition," he answered automatically. The room relaxed immediately. Pens scribbled notes. Assistants exchanged relieved glances. Ethan had built a reputation for ruthless precision. People trusted him to make impossible decisions without hesitation. That was what made yesterday feel so dangerous. Because for the first time in years, his mind was somewhere else entirely. 30 minutes later, his black town car rolled through crowded midtown streets while snowflakes melted against tinted windows. Ethan loosened his tie again and stared at the city passing outside. Coffee shops glowed warmly beside crowded sidewalks. Parents carried children wrapped in winter coats. Couples walked hand in hand beneath strings of holiday lights stretched across storefronts. Ordinary people living ordinary lives. Ethan suddenly realized he envied them. His phone vibrated beside him. "Vanessa." He stared at the screen for several seconds before answering. "You disappeared last night," she said lightly, though irritation lingered beneath her polished tone. Ethan rubbed his forehead tiredly. "The board dinner ran late. You missed the charity planning call." "I know." Silence settled briefly between them. Vanessa finally sighed. "My mother is asking whether we finalized the Aspen trip for New Year's." Ethan closed his eyes. He could already picture it perfectly. Luxury ski resort. Photographers. Champagne beside fireplaces taller than most apartments. Another carefully staged image of wealth and perfection. "I will have my assistant handle it," he answered quietly. Vanessa paused. "Are you all right?" Ethan looked out the window again as the car stopped near a crosswalk crowded with pedestrians. Then suddenly his breath caught. Across the street, beneath the striped awning of a small cafe, Claire stood helping Lily zip her winter coat, while Noah balanced 2 paper bags filled with groceries. They were laughing about something. Real laughter. Warm. Easy. The kind Ethan had not heard inside his own home in years. Snowflakes landed softly in Claire's hair as she brushed them away, smiling. For one painful moment, Ethan saw the entire life he might have had. Saturday mornings. Grocery runs. School concerts. Small apartments filled with noise and warmth instead of silence and glass walls. Ethan, Vanessa's voice echoed faintly through the phone. He barely heard her. Noah suddenly looked up from the sidewalk. Even from across the street, Ethan recognized the boy's expression instantly. Curious eyes narrowing slightly while thinking. His own expression. The same look every newspaper photographer had captured on magazine covers for years. Ethan's stomach twisted hard. "I need to call you back," he said abruptly before ending the conversation. Outside, the traffic light changed. Cars began moving again between Ethan and the small family. Standing beneath the cafe awning, Claire touched Noah's shoulder gently while Lily wrapped both hands around a steaming cup of hot chocolate. The sight was painfully simple, painfully ordinary, yet it felt more valuable than everything Ethan owned combined. The driver glanced into the rearview mirror carefully. "Sir?" Ethan did not answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed on Claire until the car finally carried him away through falling snow and crowded Manhattan streets, leaving behind the only thing that had felt real in a very long time. By Friday evening, Ethan Calloway had done something he had not done in nearly a decade. He canceled a shareholders' dinner. The news alone sent confusion through his executive staff. Men who controlled hedge funds worth billions rearranged flights and meetings because Ethan Calloway never canceled anything. But tonight, none of it mattered. Snow drifted softly against the darkening city while Ethan stood across the street from the small independent bookstore inside the mall district, his hands buried deep inside the pockets of a wool coat that cost more than the monthly rent of most Manhattan apartments. The bookstore glowed warmly through tall glass windows fogged lightly from the cold outside. Strings of soft amber lights hung above shelves packed tightly with novels, children's books, and worn paperbacks. It smelled faintly of coffee and old pages every time the front door opened. Ethan had already been standing there nearly 20 minutes, watching. Inside, Claire knelt beside Lily, helping her tape paper snowflakes onto the lower corner of a display window. Noah sat cross-legged near the children's section, reading aloud quietly to an elderly man wearing a Navy veteran cap. Ethan could not hear the words through the glass, but he saw the old man smiling while Noah turned each page carefully. Something inside Ethan tightened painfully again. The little boy even used his hands while speaking the same way Ethan always had during presentations. Small gestures, careful movements, unmistakable habits. Claire finally noticed the old man struggling to stand and hurried over immediately. She steadied him gently while Noah carried the man's shopping bag toward the register without being asked. Ethan stared at the scene in silence. No cameras, no reporters, no audience. Just kindness. Real kindness. The kind he suddenly realized money could never manufacture. A group of teenage girls passed Ethan on the sidewalk, laughing loudly beneath glowing holiday decorations. One recognized him instantly and whispered excitedly to her friends, but Ethan barely noticed. His eyes remained fixed on Claire. She looked tired tonight. Her hair was pulled into a loose knot, and faint exhaustion rested beneath her eyes as she balanced inventory papers beside the register while helping customers at the same time. Yet somehow she still smiled at every person who entered the store. Ethan remembered that smile. Claire used to smile exactly like that at him when he was broke and terrified and trying to build his first company out of a cramped apartment with secondhand furniture and overdue electric bills. Back then, she believed in him before the world ever did. Ethan looked down slowly as memory hit him harder than expected. 10 years ago, Claire stood in his office holding a small envelope with trembling hands. Positive pregnancy test. Ethan still remembered the silence that followed. Not because he was unhappy, because he was afraid. Investors had just entered his company. His mother warned him a family would destroy his momentum. Headlines about an unexpected pregnancy could weaken confidence before his company went public. "This is not the right time," he had told her coldly. God, the memory made him feel sick now. Across the street, Lily suddenly pressed both hands against the bookstore window and laughed at something Noah said. Ethan's breath caught. She had Claire's smile, but she had his eyes too. There was no denying it anymore. Deep down, Ethan already knew the truth long before he allowed himself to think the words clearly. Those children were his. A sharp winter wind moved through the street, carrying the scent of roasted chestnuts from a nearby vendor. Ethan barely felt the cold anymore. Inside the bookstore, Claire looked toward the window unexpectedly. For one brief second, her eyes met his through the glowing glass and falling snow. Neither of them moved. Then quietly, Almost sadly, Claire reached over and lowered the store blinds. The following Tuesday, Manhattan disappeared beneath freezing rain and low gray clouds that turned the city into a blur of headlights and reflections. Ethan sat alone inside his private office on the 49th floor of Callaway Global Headquarters while water streaked down the massive glass windows behind him like tears sliding across steel. The office smelled faintly of leather, cedar, and expensive coffee gone cold. Normally, Ethan loved storms. They made the city feel quieter, controlled. Tonight, the silence only made the memories louder. A thick folder rested unopened on the polished walnut desk in front of him. Claire Bennett. Ethan stared at the name for nearly 30 seconds before finally opening it. He hated himself for doing this. Hiring investigators. Pulling records. Using the same corporate machinery he used for billion-dollar negotiations to uncover pieces of a life he had abandoned. But he could not stop anymore. Not after seeing Noah and Lily. Inside the folder were hospital records, rental histories, employment files, unpaid utility notices, and old insurance claims stretching back nearly 10 years. Ethan turned the first page slowly. New York Presbyterian Hospital. Emergency labor complications. Twin delivery. Ethan's chest tightened immediately. Claire had gone through all of it alone. No spouse listed. No emergency contact besides an elderly woman in Queens who Ethan vaguely remembered as Claire's aunt. He continued reading. Medical debt. Temporary relocation. 2 jobs within 14 months. Night shifts at a grocery store while working mornings at a daycare center. Ethan leaned back slowly in his chair, staring at the rain outside. Somewhere deep beneath years of ambition and ego, shame began spreading through him like poison. 10 years ago, he thought writing Claire a check made him responsible. Mature. Practical. God, what a coward he had been. Another document slipped loose from the folder onto the desk. Ethan picked it up carefully. It was a photocopy of a check. His check. $100,000. Never cashed. Ethan froze completely. For several seconds, the only sound in the office was rain tapping softly against glass. Claire had never used the money. Not $1. Ethan lowered his head slowly while something painful twisted deep inside his chest. He remembered the exact moment he gave it to her. His office smelled like fresh paint because the building had just opened. Claire stood near the door, crying quietly, while Ethan avoided looking directly at her. "This will help you start over," he had said coldly. He thought he sounded rational back then. Controlled. Instead, now, the memory sounded monstrous. Ethan rubbed both hands across his face as exhaustion settled heavily over him. On another page, he found school enrollment forms for Noah and Lily. Under father's name, the line remained blank every single year. Ethan stared at the empty space longer than anything else in the file. Blank. As if he had never existed. His phone buzzed suddenly across the desk. Vanessa again. Ethan ignored it. The engagement party was only 2 weeks away. Luxury hotels had already been booked. Media outlets were preparing feature stories about Manhattan's newest power couple. None of it felt real anymore. Ethan reached deeper into the folder and stopped suddenly when he found a photograph paper-clipped near the back. Claire sat on a park bench between Noah and Lily wrapped in oversized winter scarves while holding cups of hot chocolate. The twins looked about 7 years old. All 3 were laughing at something outside the frame. Ethan stared at the picture so long his vision blurred slightly. There was no penthouse behind them. No private security. No luxury. Just happiness. Simple, imperfect happiness. And Ethan realized with a crushing ache that Claire had somehow managed to build a beautiful life out of the ruins he left behind. 3 nights later, the bookstore stayed open later than usual for the mall's annual Christmas charity event. Soft piano music drifted through the lower level, while children ran between decorated storefronts holding candy, canes almost as large as their arms. Snow continued falling outside the massive glass walls overlooking Fifth Avenue, covering the city in silver and gold reflections from holiday lights. Ethan stood near the entrance of the bookstore with his hands tense inside the pockets of his dark overcoat. For the first time in years, he felt nervous walking into a room. Inside, the bookstore glowed with warmth. Small paper stars hung from shelves while cinnamon candles flickered near the register beside trays of donated cookies and hot chocolate. Families crowded the reading area listening to local musicians play soft Christmas songs near the children's section. And there, Beneath amber lights and the scent of old books, Claire Bennett stood organizing donations with quiet exhaustion resting beneath her eyes. Ethan noticed immediately how carefully she moved now, like someone carrying invisible weight every single day. Claire looked up from the register and froze the moment she saw him. Around them, conversations continued softly while pages turned and children laughed nearby. But Ethan suddenly felt separated from all of it. "We are closing soon," Claire said quietly, though her voice lacked conviction. Ethan nodded once. "I know." Neither moved closer at first. 10 years of silence stood between them heavier than walls. Finally, Claire glanced toward the back reading corner where Noah and Lily sat coloring beside an older volunteer woman. "The kids are here," she said softly. "That is why I came." Claire looked down immediately, and Ethan saw her fingers tighten around a stack of receipts. Same nervous habit. Same quiet heartbreak hidden beneath composure. "Claire," his voice cracked slightly, surprising even himself. "Why did you never tell me?" She laughed once under her breath. "Not cruel, just tired." "Tell you what, Ethan." He swallowed hard. "That they are mine." Silence. The kind that seemed to pull all sound out of the room for one unbearable second. Claire slowly set the receipts down beside the register. "You made your choice 10 years ago. I was scared." "No," she answered quietly. "You were ambitious." The words landed harder than shouting ever could. Ethan lowered his eyes briefly because she was right. God, she was right. Claire looked toward the twins again before speaking. "You remember what you said to me in your office?" Ethan said nothing. He remembered every word. "You told me a family would ruin everything you worked for." Her voice remained calm, but Ethan heard the pain underneath it now. Old pain. The kind that never fully leaves. "Claire, I spent years convincing myself you would come back." Ethan felt something inside him break quietly at her words. "Every birthday," Claire continued softly, "they asked where their father was." Ethan closed his eyes briefly. Around them, the bookstore lights glowed warm against shelves lined with stories about love and forgiveness and second chances. Yet none of those stories prepared him for this. "I never told them you were a bad man," Claire whispered. "I never wanted them to carry bitterness." Ethan looked at her slowly then. Truly looked at her. This woman had protected his image even after he abandoned her to survive alone with 2 children. What kind of person did that? Noah suddenly looked up from the coloring table. "Mom." Claire quickly wiped beneath one eye before turning toward him with a smile she clearly forced into place. Ethan watched the moment happen and realized something devastating. Claire had learned how to suffer quietly. Probably because of him. Ethan stepped closer carefully. "I cannot change what I did," he said, his voice low and raw. "But please, let me try to make this right." Claire stared at him for several long seconds while soft piano music drifted through the bookstore behind them. Then finally she whispered the words Ethan feared most. "You do not get to decide that alone anymore." The bookstore closed an hour later beneath soft golden lights and fading Christmas music echoing through the nearly empty mall. Outside, heavy snow drifted past the giant glass ceiling while janitors pushed quiet machines across polished marble floors that reflected silver and white holiday decorations overhead. Most of the stores had already lowered their metal gates for the night, leaving the lower level unusually peaceful compared to the chaos of earlier crowds. Ethan remained near the register while Claire helped stack unsold books into cardboard donation boxes beside the counter. Neither of them had spoken much after the conversation. Some wounds were too old for fast answers. Noah and Lily sat near the reading corner finishing cups of hot chocolate while drawing snowmen on paper placemats the cafe downstairs had given them. Every few minutes Ethan caught himself watching them without realizing it. 10 years. 10 entire years gone. Noah suddenly looked up from his drawing. "Mom." Claire glanced over. "Yes, sweetheart." The boy hesitated briefly before pointing his pencil toward Ethan. "Why does he look like us?" The question landed softly in the quiet bookstore, but Ethan felt it hit like thunder inside his chest. Claire stopped moving completely. Even Lily looked up now with wide, curious eyes. Children notice things adults spent years trying to hide. Ethan lowered his gaze slowly, unable to breathe properly for one terrifying second. Claire set the books down carefully and walked toward the twins. Her movements looked calm, but Ethan noticed her hands trembling faintly. She knelt beside them while snow continued falling beyond the dark glass windows outside. There are some things Mommy should have explained a long time ago, she whispered gently. Noah looked between them again. Is he our dad? The world became perfectly silent. No music. No footsteps. No sound except Ethan's heartbeat pounding painfully against his ribs. Claire closed her eyes briefly before finally answering. Yes. Ethan felt the word tear through him. Lily blinked several times in confusion while Noah stared at Ethan carefully, like he was trying to solve a puzzle. Ethan had imagined many possibilities these past few days. Anger, fear, rejection, but not this quiet curiosity. Not these small, innocent faces simply waiting for truth. Then, where were you? Noah asked softly. Ethan looked down immediately because there was no answer good enough for a child. The bookstore lights reflected against polished wood shelves while the scent of cinnamon candles lingered gently in the air. Everything around him felt painfully warm compared to the cold shame spreading through his chest. Ethan crouched slowly, so he was eye level with them. I made a terrible mistake, he said quietly. His voice sounded rough now. Honest. A long time ago, I thought work was more important than the people I loved. Lily frowned slightly. That was dumb. Ethan laughed once unexpectedly, though his eyes burned. Yeah, he whispered. It really was. Claire watched silently nearby, her arms folded tightly against herself as if holding together years of exhaustion and heartbreak all at once. Noah studied Ethan for another long moment before asking the question Ethan feared most. Are you going to leave again? Ethan felt something inside him collapse completely. Not because of accusation, because of the hope hidden underneath it. The little boy was not asking out of anger. He was asking because part of him wanted Ethan to stay. Ethan swallowed hard while emotion closed painfully around his throat. He had negotiated billion-dollar contracts without fear. He had spoken before presidents and investors and television cameras watched by millions. Yet this simple question from a 10-year-old boy nearly destroyed him. Ethan looked directly into Noah's eyes, his own eyes staring back at him. Not if you let me try to make things right, he whispered. Noah glanced toward Claire uncertainly. Lily quietly reached over and held her brother's hand. Then, after several long seconds, Noah gave a small nod. It was tiny, fragile, but to Ethan, it felt larger than every business victory of his entire life. 6 months later, spring sunlight spilled across Manhattan in soft golden ribbons that reflected against glass buildings and crowded sidewalks alive with the sound of taxis, street musicians, and blooming city parks waking up after winter. The world still knew Ethan Callaway as a billionaire. Newspapers still printed his name beside headlines about international mergers and market influence. But something fundamental had changed. On a quiet Tuesday morning, Ethan stood outside Public School 317 holding 2 backpacks while Noah and Lily raced each other toward the front steps beneath rows of bright tulips planted beside the entrance. No running, Claire called from nearby, though she was already smiling. The twins ignored her completely. Noah turned at the last second and waved excitedly toward Ethan before disappearing through the school doors with Lily close behind him. Ethan stood frozen for half a heartbeat after they vanished inside. Then slowly, almost disbelievingly, he smiled. A real smile. Not the polished expression cameras captured at corporate events. Not the carefully rehearsed confidence investors expected from powerful men. This one reached his eyes. Claire noticed immediately. You are getting better at this, she said softly while adjusting the strap of her purse. Ethan looked toward the school entrance again. I missed 10 years, he admitted quietly. Sometimes I still cannot believe they let me back in at all. Claire studied him for a moment beneath warm, spring sunlight moving through the trees overhead. He looked different now, lighter somehow. Less like the untouchable billionaire the world admired, and more like the man she once loved in a tiny apartment with secondhand furniture and impossible dreams. They did not need perfection, Claire said gently. They just needed consistency. Ethan nodded slowly because she was right. The last 6 months had not magically erased the damage he caused. There were difficult conversations, awkward silences, missed expectations. Some nights Noah still hesitated before hugging him goodbye. Sometimes Lily asked questions about birthdays and school plays Ethan never attended. Those moments hurt more than any financial loss ever could. But Ethan never missed another school pickup, never ignored another phone call, never chose business over them again. 3 months earlier, the financial world nearly collapsed from shock when Ethan stepped down as active CEO of Callaway Global. Media outlets called it mysterious, Some speculated illness. Others assumed scandal. None of them understood the truth. Ethan had spent his entire adult life building an empire while losing the only people who could have made it feel meaningful. Now he was finally trying to rebuild something far more fragile. A family. Claire glanced at her watch. I should get to the bookstore. Ethan smiled faintly. I will take the twins to piano lessons after school. Claire raised an eyebrow teasingly. You remembered? Ethan placed one hand dramatically against his chest. I am deeply wounded you would doubt me. Claire laughed unexpectedly, and the sound stopped Ethan cold for a second because he realized how long it had been since he heard genuine happiness in her voice. Not forced politeness. Not survival. Real happiness. The spring breeze moved softly through the street, carrying the scent of coffee and blooming flowers from a nearby cafe. Around them, parents hurried toward offices while children laughed beneath clear blue skies. Ordinary life. The kind Ethan once believed was smaller than ambition. Now it felt priceless. Claire started walking toward the subway entrance before pausing suddenly. She turned back toward him. Ethan? Yeah. She hesitated briefly, sunlight catching softly against the silver necklace resting near her collarbone. Thank you for staying. Ethan felt emotion rise unexpectedly in his throat again. He watched her disappear slowly into the moving crowd while school bells echoed faintly in the distance. Then he looked up toward the bright windows of the elementary school where his children sat learning, laughing, growing. For years, Ethan Calloway believed success meant becoming powerful enough that nobody could hurt him. But standing there beneath warm spring sunlight with two tiny backpacks still hanging from his shoulder, he finally understood the truth. The richest moments in life were never the ones you could buy. They were the ones you almost lost forever.